Ako ang inyong kakampi na si Puting Pinoy. At ngayon, mag-react tayo sa video na request ng ni kakamping AJ. Check this out. 1954 debate, Johnny Antillon talks about communism. But that's not only his debate. He has many other debates. You could dig more. Okay, so yan. Yan ang gagawin natin ngayon, mga kakampi. Papanoorin natin yung video niyon. Pero bago na yun, gusto ko lang pasalamatan. Well, let's do our announcements. So ito, and then magpasalamat tayo sa mga channel members natin. Si Kakampi Joy Casamayor, Sherilyn Gunda, and Wellboy TV. Maraming salamat sa suporta nyo. Kung dahil sa inyong support, mas lalo ako nakikagawa ng mga videos ko. So nagpapasalamat ako sa inyo. At mga kakampi, kung gusto nyong sumali sa channel memberships, may mga iba't ibang tiers at pwede kayong sumali doon. Samparin na lang ninyo yung join, which is next to the subscribe button. At ganoon din mga kakampi, huwag kalimutan na samparin ang like at samparin ang kampana para malalaman nyo pag may bagong video na tayo. Ilan pang announcements gusto kong sabihin bago natin sisimulan ito is gusto kong subukan ito mga kakampi na gaganap tayo ng mga regular live streams. Okay? Yan ang gusto kong subukan natin ngayon is regular live streams. So, hindi ko pa alam kung, 4 to 5 times a week in the evenings and then maybe one weekend day, so we'll do 5 to 6 of these, a week. But yeah, we'll see how this all goes. By the way, hindi ako titigil, hindi ako hihinto sa paggawa ng mga vlogs ko na regular, na mga edited and higher quality vlogs. Mas madali lang talaga ito. At para sa akin, yung vlogging ko, it takes a long time, a lot of energy and effort to edit them. And recently, I think dahil doon, nakakaroon ng malaking agwat kung kailan ako nagpo-post. And I think dahil doon, may mga ilan na nakakalimot sa mga videos ko. So, I'm trying this, sana mas mapatibay natin yung community natin and yung regular viewers natin bilang mga kakampi. Ganon din mga kakampi, please mag-comment kayo, magmungkahi kayo kung ano ang mga susunod na video na gusto nyong talakayin natin o panoorin natin. So yun, with that mga kakampi, let's go ahead and get into this. Today, like I said, pag-usapan natin si Johnny Antillon, which is part of the foreign exchange students in the US who debated about various topics. This one, hindi ko alam kung ano yung paksa. It looks, it's called The Final Speech, this one is. Actually, before I share that one, I want to show you guys this. Nakita ko na ito. Because the grandson, yung apo ni Johnny Antillon, dito siya at ipinakita niya kung anong mukha niya in his later part of his life. At tingnan niyo siya, may balbas. May balbas, kabalbas pala si kakamping Johnny. So, para sa akin, A-okay siya in my book. Tingnan niyo yan. Pag-imat yan yung balbas. And parang medyo kumukha niya si George Lucas, So, okay. Yun na. Let's go ahead mga kakampi at sisimulan na natin yung video na ito. I'll go ahead and mag-respond ako sa mga comments nyo mamaya mga kakampi. Silipin ko, mga musta muna ako sa inyo. Okay, hey mga kakampi. This is show how bright we are during that time. But now, if you are bright people, they will think of you as weird. If you're a visionary, you're hallucinating. If you know the answers at all to all the problems, they tell you you're crazy. Yes, smart shaming kikampi ang tinutukoy doon, no? So, tingnan na natin ito, ha? Alrighty. Ito na.
Participants in this panel of The World We Want are Vangala Jaya Ram from India, Gerhard Casper from Germany, Peter Hudson from United Kingdom, and Johnny Antillon from the Philippines. The first voice you hear will be that of Vangala Ram from India. Ram, will you open the discussion for us?
Salamat, Kikampi. Okay lang, Kikampi.
We want a world in which people can live as neighbors. Friendly neighbors, preferably, but peaceful neighbors at least.
Yes.
Meeting here in the
So
Assembly
coexistence
Hall
ang
of the United
pag-uusapan
Nations,
natin.
we are especially regret that our forum group does not include students from Soviet Russia. Neither, of course, does it include American students. You have been so kind to us here that the only real moment of strangeness that I can recall was during a conversation about world politics. The participants seemed to assume that the only powers worth considering in today's world are the USA and the USSR. The 32 of us come from 32 countries that bear allegiance neither to America nor to Russia. Yet our people share with your people and with the Russian people the hope that war can be avoided. Maybe some of our lands or leaders, maybe even some of us, could help you
Matalino din siya. Gustong-gusto ko yung punto ng taong ito. Anong pangalan ng taga-India?
A bridge of understanding. That is why we find so precious this chance to lay before you our viewpoints on some of the problems that are
And
troubling us all.
I think, by the way, mga kakampi, sobrang relevant itong paksang natin ngayon sa panahon natin, sa kasalukuyan lipunan, di ba? Kung minsan nakakaroon tayo ng mga divisions, mga tribes, maging sa mga, affiliations natin, maging political, maging religion, maging, favorite basketball teams, etc., etc. So maganda talaga itong talakayan nila.
By the way, Ram, I assume that when you speak of some countries serving as the bridge of understanding, I assume thereby that you are defending India's policy of neutrality?
Johnny, I was not thinking of India in particular, but now that you have brought it out, I might as well defend her role. The events of the past few years have made it fairly obvious that India is particularly suited for such a role. For instance, in the case of the custodianship of the prisoners of war in Korea, India
Unity
has
and
also
peace and
amply
diversity.
demonstrated
Tama
her
ka,
neutral
Kampi.
character, her independent judgment. In fact, what is neutrality? It is synonymous with independence.
Oh, I disagree with you, Ron.
Oh,
It shows that neutrality is synonymous with dependence. If the United States hadn't been so neutral before the outbreak of the last World War, she might have gone a long way towards avoiding it. Instead, America's future became dependent on the outcome of the war in Europe, so she was forced to take sides.
Peter, the very example you select refutes your own point. It is the neutrality of America since her independence and throughout her youth which has brought her to the position which she is in today.
But today she's not neutral.
But she is strong.
Oh, but today the neutral countries aren't the strong countries. They use neutrality to justify their weakness.
saglit lang. Medyo na-distract ako dito. Bakit isa lang ang podium nila tsaka microphone nila? Sana ginawa nila yung tulad ng dati nila. Oh, I guess this was 1954. Siguro isa ito sa mga pinakauna. Tapos pagkatapos nito sa pag-shifting ng mga katuan, sobrang malikot. Sabi nila, oh sige, bigyan natin sila ng tig-isang microphone. Okay.
They don't want to be strong or because they're too small to be strong.
And there's a third reason. Neutral countries today are neutral because they think that by being neutral today, they will be strong enough tomorrow not to be neutral anymore.
You see, the big problem in Germany today is whether we should be neutral. When the war ended, we heard always the same thing.
Now,
A German
tandaan natin
army
mga
is-
kakampi, yung World War II just barely ended at this point. Ano bang taon natapos yung World War II? Parang 1946? Ganyan yata? Saglit ang mga kakampi. I-research ko saglit. What year did World War II end? So 1945. It looks like February 9th, 1945 nung natapos na yung World War II. So ito na. So I think this is very significant, diba? Bilang isang German, kasi nung panahon na yun, diba, nakaroon ng mga Nazis. And I think nag-recover sila. Parang kailangan nilang bumawi pagkatapos niyon. So I'm interested to know his
We heard it on
perspective.
the wireless, we read it in the newspapers, and every foreigner we talked to said it. Today, we hear just the opposite. Today,
1945.
the West
Salamat
says the
kakampi.
European defense community needs German soldiers, but France doesn't agree.
Well, France, of course, has some reasons for her feelings about Germany.
Well, Peter, I found the same strong feeling against Germany in the United States. Sometimes so strong that I hated to be the German delegate.
Yeah,
People
I
always
feel
say
that.
the Germans haven't changed. Especially the German young people have changed. Sometimes more young people than in the United States are recognizing that life is not only to drive a
Relevant.
car and to play basketball.
Mhm.
There's one simple reason for it. We had to see too much of war in our own country. So we are forced to recognize that we must look for the real basis of our life. Because sometimes it might be too late and we cannot wait for the adults who come and offer us something to choose. It was too late for us in Germany in 1933. So today we ourselves must look for the basis on which we can live.
Mhm.
You see, when the war ended, we saw that people all over the world hated us because we have been nationalists. So we know that neither war nor nationalism is the answer, the
Yes.
solution to get better relations to other countries. And Germany needs these
Interesting.
better relations.
Well, Britain, too, has had her post-war problems of relations with other countries, but they're of a different sort. You see, we must keep a common basis of understanding with the United States.
Huh?
This means that realizing that each country is important to the other. You see, the very
I think maganda yung punto ng sinabi ng German student. Hindi porket kung saan ka ipinanganak, and I think Germany is a great example of this, kung saan ka man ipinanganak, hindi yan ang pinakamahalaga, kundi kung sino ka bilang isang tao. Tulad ng tattoo ko dito sa and baybayin ko pinasulat, yun. Ito yung Tree of Life, yung Celtic Tree of Life. And dito sa baybayin, isa sa mga quotations ko, iisa lang ang ugat ng sangkatauhan. You know, so kung minsan, I think masyadong nakafocus tayo kung ano ba yung lahi or ano ba yung bansa ng isang tao. Kung tutuusin, dapat pag-usapan natin bilang isang sangkatauhan ang kapayapaan. Kasi kung hindi natin gagawin yan, makakaroon ng mga issue tulad ng Nazi Germany ulit, di ba? Pag sobrang lakas yung bansa, pag walang pakialam sa mga iba, sa mga ibang bansa, babaliwalain, apakan, di ba? Nakikita natin yan ngayon sa panahon ngayon, sa nangyayari, di ba, sa pamahalaan ng China, di ba? Parang marami silang natatapakan. So, ituloy natin.
fact that the United States wasn't even discovered when we were already a world power that makes it difficult for us to realize that America is ahead of us.
Have you forgotten, Peter, that India was a world power when Englishmen were still living in caves?
We hadn't discovered you then.
Totoo yan.
As I was saying, there are other causes of misunderstanding. You see, the American quick-fire commercial tactics, in our opinion, they're not applicable to world politics. And you become patient with us because we don't use the same tactics. Nor do you always recognize the difference in our two temperaments. Whereas the United States sees things in black and white, Britain sees the shades in between those two colors. You would solve any problem with a stroke of a pen, just like that, whereas Britain prefers to let time take a hand in the problem.
I think that's also
There's
a really
another-
good point. Magandang punto din yan. Dapat suriin ang mga bagay-bagay. Hindi lahat ay black and white. Hindi masasabi masama ito or mabuti ito. Agad-agad sa lahat ng paksa. May mga paksa na masasabi talaga natin na hindi talaga ito tama or sobrang tama ito. Tulad ng, di ba, yung nangyayari ngayon is Stop Asian Hate. So, obviously, halatang-halata na problema yan. So, dapat talakayin natin at lutasin natin bilang isang sangkatauhan. Pero, you know, kung minsan kailangan din isa-isip na hindi naman tayo lahat pare-pareho ng pag-iisip at dahil siguro iba yung pananaw natin, iba yung pinanggalingan natin, yung vantage point natin, kaya naging ganyan yung pananaw natin. Hindi dahil totoo, kundi ganyan lang yung vantage point natin. Kaya dapat maging mas matyaga tayo pagdating sa mga actions natin and maging mas maunawain and bukas ang pag-iisip natin.
Source of misunderstanding, and that's the inability of quite a lot of Americans to differentiate between communism and socialism. And that makes it difficult for me because I come from a welfare state. Then Britain accepts the fact of your power politically, but not emotionally. When we laugh at your overstatement, at your accents, at your witch hunting, it's only because we need some form of psychological uplift. You see, by laughing at you, we delude ourselves into thinking that we're your equals in power.
Filipinos neither laugh nor smile at you Americans. However, because of America's role in the Philippines, I speak as a nation who trusts your motives. Not all Asians think as we do. However, they have a valid reason for it, and this is it. In trying to be friendly, you become aggressively friendly, and you ram your aid down our throats, and you tell us that you know better than we do how your aid should be used.
That's right.
Yep. Diba, yan ang isang bagay na maganda sa pakikibagay, pero maari din ginawang sandata laban din sa'yo, yung pakikibagay. Kasi paano kung nakikibagay ka, tapos yung tao, binabaliwala yung pagkatao mo, di ba? So mahalaga din na hindi lang pakikibagay, siguro, sa tingin ko, sa palagay ko, di ba, isa yan sa mga sinasabi natin na malakas na kaugalian ng mga Pinoy is pakikibagay. Pero I think kung minsan kinakailangan din na sabihin, well, ito kami or itong pag-iisip namin and hindi kailangan lahat hospitality or pakikibagay, di ba? Like lalong-lalo yung mga banyaga na pumaparito sa Pilipinas. You know, isang example that I think of is yung foreigners, pag pumapunta sila dito and then wala silang effort na matutunan ng wika ng Tagalog or Bisaya or isa sa mga major Filipino languages, I feel like para sa akin, medyo may issue yan para sa akin. Like, siyempre maganda na maraming magaling mag-English dito sa Pilipinas, pero intindihin din sana natin na mahalaga na pahalagahan ng mga wika ng Pilipinas.
The point 4.8 is an example. No doubt, it is a genuine expression of the desire of America to help an economically backward country. It has helped us very much.
Oo,
It is
kakampi na
also
panood
good
ko na yung
because we have to
Raul
put up matching
Contreras.
funds ourselves. And it is therefore a truly cooperative effort. But while the principle you start off with is cooperation, it sometimes degenerates into control. For instance, you do not allow point-for money to be used for capital goods, even though we should want it, even though it should be desirable for us. That makes us wonder sometimes whether America wants us to be perpetual customers of theirs and not producers ourselves.
One of the great challenges in this
Oh, hey!
is knowing enough
Neil
about a
deGrasse
subject
Tyson.
to think you're right,
Wow.
but not
Smart.
enough about the subject to know you're wrong.
Yes! Wow, maganda yan. Salamat.
Now, just a minute.
Magandang ad spot yan. Maging objective tayo, and it actually relates doon sa topic natin ngayon. By the way, good evening kay Kamping Luan. So ito, ipagpatuloy natin.
Let us not generalize, Ram. That is not true in the rest of Asia. America has set up producers' industries in the Philippines, Indonesia, in Burma, and in many parts of Europe as well. Hasn't she, Gerhard?
I think you are right, Johnny. She helped us in Germany to build up all our industry. But even more important, the United States is working with us to get a European Union. England, on the other hand, says that she's in favor of it, but doesn't want to be involved.
Now, Britain favors a European Union, but not at the cost of her Commonwealth strength. She hasn't joined herself because a European government would necessarily have more French, German, Italian, and other continental representatives than British. The result would be that British policy would be dictated by a distinctly non-British government.
I should like to ask Ram this. If Germany and France can solve the South problem by Europeanizing it, could India and Pakistan find a similar solution to the problem of Kashmir?
Very sweet of you to suggest it, but my answer to your question is a straight and simple no. Anyway, the suggestion is irrelevant. Europe already has the basis of a political organization. Asia does not.
I wonder why not. Do we Europeans have more in common than Asian peoples do?
The Europeans, through their imperial policy of divide and rule, have done their best to make us forget what we had in common.
Yeah, yan ang nakikalungkot, 'di ba? Yung ginawa ng British Empire, 'di ba? Nangapi yung British Empire doon sa India actually. At nakaroon ng sobrang daming issue dahil doon. Kaya may mga conflicts na ngayon sa India and Pakistan. Kung hindi pa ninyo napanood yung pelikula na Gandhi, maganda talaga yan na panoorin para mas alamin kung anong kasaysayan doon. It's patterned after the American standards. Yeah. Actually, I think ganon din yung World War II. Dahil sa World War II, pinalabas yung ng UN. So nagtipon-tipon ng mga bansa. And I think it's over 170 countries or something like that na nagpirma ng isang document na tinatawag Universal Basic Human Rights. At doon nakabatay yung mga batas natin ngayon. Or dapat nakabatay yung mga batas natin. Kasama din doon yung Pilipinas noon pa sa pinakasimula. So, China and Saudi Arabia ay dalawa sa mga hindi nakapirma. And anyway, I think that that's a great document. Kung minsan siguro talakayin natin yung human rights na yun, yung basic 30 basic human, universal human rights. Maganda siyang talakayin, mga kakampi. Oops. Saan tayo?
To be involved.
Now, policy of divide and rule have done their best to make us forget what we had in common. But now we have got rid of them.
Yeah, that's
The
Gandhi
very
starring
fact of a common
Ben Kingsley,
colonial background gives to us Asians much in common. We are all backward economically and industrially, weak militarily. We share a common philosophy of non-violence. And most of all, we share a common enthusiasm for our freedom. And we all feel that at this young stage of our independence, to enter into a world struggle would be to lose the freedom it took us so long to get.
It'd be very interesting to know what you think about the admission of China into the United Nations. I know that Chin Tai Kim, the delegate from Korea, says a very definite no.
Pasensya mga kakampi.
I disagree
China
completely.
in the United
It is
Nations?
inconceivable to think of the United Nations without China. A world organization that ignores a bloc of 400 million people is not
400 million. Oh my gulay.
China, there is a
400 million yung mga taga-China noon. Ano ba yung ngayon? China population. Ngayon ay 1.4 1.4 billion people. Like, pag nakikita natin yung ganyan bilang sa loob ng, gosh, that's, hindi ako magaling sa math. Kakamping Luan, that's like 3.3 times bigger within the span of 70 years. Siguro siya ang dahilan kung bakit nakaroon sila ng one-child policy nila, which I know is controversial, but I mean, in one way, di ba, like, nagiging mas masagana na yung economy nila. I think that that's part of the reason for it.
The danger that the UN may degenerate into an AAS.
And just consider,
an association.
Sorry, and just consider kung hindi nila ginawa yung one-child policy na yun, like how much bigger it would be.
Of American satellites. If Russia is in the United Nations, I wonder why not China? The Soviet Union is there, and therefore China can also. Moreover, the admission of China would lessen the danger of war, for then she could take part with us in the peaceful alternatives to war, which are discussion, mediation, and arbitration.
I disagree with both Ram and Kim in part.
Salamat
I do not believe that we should deprive ourselves of a bargaining point, and therefore I feel that China should not be admitted into the United Nations unconditionally. If she must be admitted, let us get something in exchange, like unification in Korea and the promise there of an election under UN auspices.
Well,
wow.
The Korean delegate says that free elections in Korea wouldn't be possible. Anyway, he says that the admission of China to the United Nations would be immoral.
I admit its immorality, but this is no time now to discuss and split infinitives and discuss the fine hairs of philosophy. We must be realistic and face facts. And
pragmatic.
We in Asia must look to the future. Now it comes to me that I find it strange that you Americans think that most Asians are bound to the past. In a sense, I suppose we are. But I admit that what struck me most about you Americans was that you discuss the future as if you think there will be one. I appreciate this especially since I come from a generation in the Philippines that is working for the future. We are one of the few countries in Asia with a young leader. Under President Magsaysay's policies, we have no
President
past to bind us.
Magsaysay. President Magsaysay. Ano pa siya? Like, pangilang president pa siya? President Magsaysay. Ano ba ang mga palagay nyo kay President Magsaysay kung kilala nyo mga kakampi? I'm curious kung ano bang, gusto kong matutunan kung anong palagay nyo doon.
You know how we solve the communist problem in the Philippines? By turning communists into capitalists. By giving communist people schools and land which they could call their own. That is proof, I think, that new leaders can find new solutions to old problems.
Yes. Gusto ko ang sinabi niya sa halip ng parang ano pa ang tamang salitang ito. It's like, kung gusto niyo ng pagbago, wag mong apakan yung tao. Kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, wag sanang salakain yung tao, kundi maging kakampi natin yung tao na yun, kahit makaiba yung paniniwala, kahit makakaiba yung mga ideologies. Kasi wala talagang mangyayari na maganda kung purong away ang mga tao. I think isa sa mga problema na napansin ko sa panahon ngayon ay may mga tao na ayaw nila na pag-usapan ang mga bagay na ito kasi mas preference ng karamihan is iwasan yung confrontation. Pero yung problema, pag mayroon confrontation, sa halip ng pagkakaroon ng matinong pag-uusap at intellectual debate, nakakaroon na ng mga ad hominem and mga iba pang logical fallacies. And I think that yung punto ni Johnny Antillon is just a really, really good point na sana pag-usapan, sana isa sa gawa natin yung ganyan form of debate and logic and rhetoric.
Prime Minister Nehru may not be young in years, but India as a nation is young and full of vigor. Since our independence in 1947, we have drawn up a constitution by which India becomes the largest democracy in the world.
Salamat Kikampi.
And though we have 75% illiteracy, in our general elections 3 years ago, a greater percentage went to vote than in America's highly literate and experienced democracy. And
That's
even
President
our women
Bell.
play
Okay.
a more important role in the public life of India than in any other country. We have more women in our parliament, more women ambassadors and provincial governors,
So maayos na
more women in our
paraan.
cabinet than in any other
That's
country.
awesome.
And even the president of the United Nations is an Indian woman.
Well, Ram, the only
Well
reason
done.
Britain stayed in India so long after she
Sounds like
started wanting
Magsaysay was
independence
awesome.
is that we doubted your ability to govern yourselves. And I admit, we got the shock of our lives when you did make a go of it in such a short time.
Is it possible that you're making the same mistake in Africa?
Well, it depends very much on
Oh,
which
that's
part of
sad.
Africa you mean. If you mean West Africa,
It's really
then
sad.
possibly we are. And if Kitty, as we call him, is a representative of the coming generation in the Gold Coast, well, I think we don't need to have any fears of letting them take their own government into their own hands. But, Ram, if you're talking about Kenya, then I think if we walked out and left Kenya to the Mau Mau, there'd be a reign of terror. But an interracial council has been set up in Nairobi a few days ago, in which an African holds a portfolio for the first time in any British East or Central African territory.
Peter, I was thinking less of any particular area than of the general principle involved. In order that our suspicion of the West completely disappear, the last relics of colonialism in the world must disappear.
Yes,
As an
tama.
addendum to that, I'd like to say that here in the United Nations, we have a trusteeship council which is charged with the duty of taking over colonial areas. This answers effectively the excuse of most colonial powers today, that the reason they are where they are is that the people they govern do not know how to govern themselves.
Mhm.
I believe that by turning to the trusteeship council more and more, we can get more used to the idea of a world organization.
But Johnny, it is hard to get used to the idea of World Organization if you are not even allowed to be a member of it. In this group
Ah,
of 32 students from 32 countries, 9 are not members of UN. As far as my country, Germany, is concerned, while we are waiting to get membership in the United Nations, we are at least doing something to get a European community. I think these regional groupings are a step toward accustoming nations to the idea of internationalism.
Gusto ko rin yung German student na ito. Matalino din siya. Tsaka yung Indian student din. Medyo the jury is still out sa British student, pero basahin ko ito saglit. He was able to convince guerrilla soldiers to surrender and was able to grant land for them as a reward. My grandfather was one of them, by the way. Oh, one of what? Kikampi was one of the guerrilla soldiers or one of the, or yeah, that's really cool. Thank you for that knowledge. I think that siguro maganda talaga yan na, you know, gamitin, you know, ibalik yung mga ganyan, I guess, values na sa halip ng papatayin mo na lang yung opposition. Why don't we work towards peace, work towards na maganda para sa lahat, no?
Two events which have taken place during the last 3 months have made me very optimistic about the future of world peace. The first is the suggestion of President Eisenhower made to the United Nations in December for an international control of atomic energy. Frankly, at first I doubted the sincerity of this suggestion.
Is
But
that
my visit to
Eisenhower?
the United Nations on Tuesday last, along with other members of the forum group, has changed my belief. I am not only convinced of the absolute sincerity which prompted President Eisenhower to come out with that suggestion, but what is more, I am now certain that it is and can be the only lasting basis for world peace, and as such is inevitable. The second event of importance, which took place a couple of weeks ago, was the recent Moscow statement that an atomic war means the end of civilization. Thus, for the first time, the Soviets have recognized that a war means not only the destruction of capitalism, but of the entire
Just goes
world.
to show how much can change.
This mutual recognition from both sides that a war means the annihilation of civilization is very significant. It has to be recognized that the United Nations today represents the hope of mankind. It is a concrete translation of man's desire for peace.
Yes.
In that sense, it is a culmination of historical experience and the logical outcome of man's sublimest efforts.
You know what, mga kakampi?
It affords a common platform.
I think this week, isa sa mga tema natin, may nakita din ako na nag-criticize or bumatikos si Johnny Antillon sa US. Gustong-gusto kong panoorin ng video na yun. Siguro bukas talakayin natin. And then pagkatapos niyon, gusto ko din talakayin natin yung 30 universal human rights, basic human rights. Tingnan ko kung makikasama si batas natin. Tanungin ko siya. But I think that would be a really, really good one to do.
Of divergent views can sit together and talk over their differences. And isn't that a better alternative to war?
100%.
No doubt, the United Nations is not perfect. For instance, I feel that if the following amendments to it are made, it could become a more effective agency. 1, if all federations and blocs within the United Nations are dissolved. 2, if the veto power is abolished. 3, if all independent nations are made full and equal members of the United Nations through their real governments and not through imaginary ones. 4, if there is representation on the basis of population. This, of course, would mean that the white people would be greatly outnumbered, a fact which has to be faced sooner or later.
Yeah.
Asia has now a more important and decisive role than the power blocs want her to have. This is the time that the Asian nations must combine by having a common policy of independence in world affairs. No Asian nation must allow herself to become a satellite either of America or of Russia. No one but Asia, through a joint endeavor, can avoid a world war. By aligning themselves with one of the power blocs, an Asian nation risks her independence, and such an alignment also represents an explicit expression of a desire to fight. But that is not what the people of Asia want now. They are young and need to develop themselves economically to a full stature and not engage in a world struggle. If possible, Asia will do her best to avoid a world war. If not, she will try to keep out of it. The conflict today is not between communism and capitalism, or between totalitarianism and democracy, or between freedom and slavery. The conflict really is between the haves and the have-nots.
Yes.
Between the few who have plenty to eat, who live in good homes, who are educated, who have medical facilities,
100%.
and between those millions and millions of people in Asia and elsewhere who do not have enough to eat, who are unemployed, who sleep on road pavements, who are denied the chance of going to school, and who have no means to defend themselves against disease. And much of this due to hundreds of years of colonial domination. This maladjustment of human relations cannot be the permanent and lasting basis of world peace.
Gusto kong tingnan kung sino siya kasi matalino din siya. Gusto kong malaman kung anong nangyari sa kanya, yung student taga-India. That's so true. I feel like yung pinakamalaking issue na nangyari ay economic issues. Yung economic issues hanggang ngayon, like, makakaroon kaya ng conflict yung mga tao kung like pantay-pantay ang mga tao pagdating sa economic well-being. At tandaan natin, maging communism, maging capitalism. At pag sinasabing communism, tanggalin natin lahat ng mga idea tungkol sa terrorism kasi hindi porket communist ay terrorist. Siyempre, alam ko na iba yung kasaysayan dito at iba yung kasaysayan sa mga ibang lugar sa mundo. Pero kung suriin lang natin yung sinabi ito ay tungkol sa commonwealth. Ito ay tungkol sa lahat ng mga tao ay makikinabang at makikaunlad. And it's the same thing with capitalism. Yung kaibahan, yung pinakakaiba ng dalawang yun is, there's an issue with communism. There's an inherent issue. Well, actually, with both of them, there's a very inherent issue that humans are corruptible. So, sino man yung mga leaders natin, maaring makorrupt sila. And likas lang yan kasi ang likas natin bilang mga tao, human nature is self-interest. And if you are going to get something, like kahit kami ng mga magulang ko, like nakakaiba kami kung minsan ng mga ideas and sinasabing political, pero kung tutuusin, hindi naman political sa tingin ko. It's like, halimbawa, kung may sinabi yung tatay ko na, oh, ganito yung gusto ng leader, I think, nung panahon Obama, and then, like, ganyan ang gusto niya. Tapos ang sagot ko, like, parang masama ba yung hangarin na yun? And then ang sinabi ko sa kanya is, well, maraming makikinabang. Like, tama, nakuha mo yung punto niya. Siguro hindi ikaw yung makikinabang, pero maraming makikinabang. So, I think it's important to realize that lahat sa atin may mga ideas tayo kung ano ang pinaka-perfect way. At kung tutuusin, wala naman perfect way. And the perfect way is just everybody getting on the same page and discussing things. Because yun, tama si Kakamping Franz, income inequality is real. Like economic inequality is very, very real. We need to find more solutions, I think, para makakaunlad ang lahat ng mga tao. The Indian guy was obviously fed up with the bad repercussions of colonial rule, as he should. They need to stand up for their countrymen. After Gandhi died, Jawaharlal Nehru, need to uplift their identity as Indian. Yes, and tama yan. Alam niyo mga kikampi, isang bagay yan. Kasi naalala ko nung una ako dumating dito sa Pilipinas at may mga narinig ko na maraming nagsabi na, di ba, Pilipinas, hindi ko naintindihan yung sense of nationalism noon. Kasi ako bilang Amerikano, hindi ako, so ganito ang kailangan natin intindihin tungkol sa akin. Hindi ako nationalist. Hindi ako patriotic masyado pagdating sa US. Ano bang ipagyabang? Like maraming masamang bagay na nangyayari sa US. At privileged yung US as a country. Hindi ibig sabihin na yung mga suliranin ay hindi mahalaga doon. In fact, sobrang halaga nga nalutasin. But at the same time, bakit ko ipagyabang na, the best, America, the best. Kung tutuusin, depende lang kung sino ka. Kung mahirap ka lang, noon panahon, kung maitim ka, kung Black American ka, ngayon, actually noon, kahit mga Filipinos, maraming naghirap sa US. So para sa akin, why would I be proud of something that not everyone can be happy about? Where there is inequality and injustice. So, ganoon din dito sa Pilipinas, naisip ko, tulad ng sinabi ni Kakamping Duan dito tungkol sa identity as Indians, I think it's the same thing dito sa Pilipinas, is kinakailangan yung identity as Filipinos, yung resilience, dahil di ba nanggagaling sa pangangapi din dito sa Pilipinas. And for me, I was like, that's one reason I think loving the Philippines is an honorable thing, because I can only imagine that having a system of oppression set historic thing. It's a very painful thing. And I don't like that. Kaya ako nagtatagalog madalas is because kung tutuusin, bakit English yung sinasalita sa buong mundo? You know, naiintindihan ko na maganda na magkaroon ng isang wika para makikapag-communicate tayong lahat. Pero bakit sa US, sobrang daming tao tulad ko na puti na hindi marunong magsalita ng isa pang wika? Dito sa Pilipinas, halos lahat ng mga tao ay bilingual. Yung mga iba, polyglots, tatlo, trilingual. You know, polyglot na, as in 3 or more languages ang alam ng mga ibang Pinoy dito. That's a beautiful thing. Why can't Americans be more like that? Na mas papahalagahan ang mga wika ng ibang tao, because we see in language, that's a big part sa pagpapahalaga ng isang kultura at mga tao, is yung identity na yun na nanggagaling sa wika. Good evening, Kikamping Kenny. Let's continue this. We'll go ahead and check this out. Yes, he says that he has a mistrust, but his arguments are on point. Yeah, wag tayong mag-alala doon, okay? Pag-usapan talaga yan. Being patriotic is different from being nationalistic. Okay, mamaya pag-usapan natin yan kasi medyo interesting yan sa akin. Gusto kong talakayin natin yung differences niyon. Yeah, matalino talaga yung taga-India.
Well, I'm afraid I can't agree with all Ram said there.
Ooh, of course.
His point about the haves and
Of course. Of course. Of course, yung taga-Britain, yung parang nakahangad ng colonial issues. So, siya yung simbolo ng masasabi kong white privilege na nangyayari ngayon sa US, is sobrang nahihirapan na makita yung pananaw ng mga inaping people of color, you know? So, wait, pakinggan natin kung anong sasabihin niya. I'm very familiar sa mga ganitong kaisipan kasi lumaki ako na maraming tao na ganyan ang pag-iisip nila.
Suggests a striking analogy. The position that the world's reached today was reached by Britain at the time of the Industrial Revolution. Then a few people got very rich, whilst the great majority worked under very poor conditions for very little money. And this gap between the rich and poor grew. Many economists believe that the gap must be maintained if the economy of the capitalist state was to survive. Well, Christians were heard at this, and they began to help the poor. That was philanthropy. Then the fact had to be faced that this gap wasn't necessary to maintain economic stability. Then the government took a hand in it. The alleviation of the condition of the poor became the concern of the national government. An income tax was introduced to better the conditions of the poor. And to meet the cost, men with certain incomes contributed to the government towards that income tax. Now, to complete the analogy, the time has come for the rich countries of the world to face the fact that the gap between themselves and the underdeveloped countries isn't necessary to maintain world economic stability.
Okay,
They're
that's
realizing
okay.
this to some extent,
Okay.
to the extent of Point 4 and the Colombo Plan.
Okay, so sabi niya na siguro may mga ibang taga-Britain na natatakot sila kung aangat yung mga iba pang bansa, like paano yung kapangyarihan or yung sagana ng UK. Pero kung tutuusin, ang sinasabi niya is hindi kinakailangan na ganyan. Like, hindi kailangan katakutan yan. Okay. Okay, that makes sense.
But these individual countries are just philanthropists. The United Nations here is the great hope, but at present they're relying on voluntary pledges from various countries. Now, why can't wealthy countries do as they did within themselves when they reached a similar state of affairs? Why can't there be under United Nations auspices a form of international income tax where nations with an income over a certain amount can contribute, for example, 2 or 3% of their income in a form of tax payable to the United Nations? This tax would pay for development in Asia and Africa and the Middle East, where the costs are too high to be borne by individual countries, and any hope of a quick profit is very dim indeed. Development must be an effort of cooperation on behalf of the wealthy countries through the United Nations. Then no obligation will be felt by any small country towards any great single power, and therefore there'll be no reluctance to accept aid. Like national income tax, it'll become both an act of self-interest and at the same time of justice.
Okay.
Did you promise yourself 2021 would be the year you'd be more productive?
Yes.
Get all your work and life organized?
Yes.
Everyone does. Few actually do.
Yep, tama.
Says, income tax always touches me in a very tender spot. And when an Englishman speaks of paying out money, then things can be as bad as they seem. Usually, whenever I discuss with people the kind of world we want, they astonish me by describing an utopia
Well,
without...
isa sa mga issue ng colonization in the first place, diba, ay walang reparations or konti lang yung reparations. I think that that's one of the important things na kinakailangan isipin natin, no? Salamat sa pagmahal sa Pilipinas. Salamat din kay Kampi. Yes, I mean, I think reparations should be made tulad ng nangyari sa pelikula na Frozen 2.
Yes. They tell me of a world where a man can lounge around with a pipe in one hand and a book in the other. As for me, I like this world. I like the strivings and the plans of this particular century, for it makes me feel like being a part of a wonderful and exciting experiment. I marvel that not everyone realizes how fortunate he is to be alive today. Here we are on the threshold of realizing the communion of nations. Here we are, favored spectators at the unveiling of some of nature's most precious secrets. And we are closer to the stars than we've ever been. However much I like this world, I still believe there is one thing it can do without: war. Perhaps my reasons are selfishly personal. Perhaps I exaggerate the impact of war. But I survived one war, and I know how it feels. I know what it is to be afraid of nothing and yet everything. I know what it is to crouch in a shelter's corner, not knowing if the next bomb would be my own. I admit that war has given us many times the necessary push to do many things that might not have been done otherwise. But still, I hate war for its general uselessness. I hate it because every time we have one, we rob ourselves of time which we could have used in building and not destroying. If I had lived before the A and H bombs, I might be less optimistic of the future. But I feel that we shall enjoy peace, because I believe and I feel deeply that no nation shall start a war which none can possibly survive. With the weapons now in our hands, and if we start another world war, there can be no distinction between loser and victor. I do not want a future which we are sure of shall be rosy, because I believe that I like the suspense which gives to life its only true zest. If we must lose, I do not want to be disheartened in advance. And if we must win, I do not want to be bored by knowing so beforehand. I believe that if there is one thing we deserve the pleasure of anticipation. I believe that this world we have deserves a vote of confidence. With its dirt and cleanness, its ups and downs, and its total unexpectedness, it has given to us, through variety, more pleasure than pain. This particular century deserves special credit. Whatever else it may be, it is still the broadest, the most exciting, and the most promising of all the centuries that have gone by. May this world always have its troubles except one. May it always be as challenging as it is. May it always have the scope and panoramic view that each one of us can have in it. May it always be, and may it never be, a place, a soft place for soft people with soft heads. For I believe that we need the challenge, constant challenge, to bring out the nobility that is in each one of us. With such a world of such challenge and scope, our lives might never be complacent, but they shall certainly be worth living.
Nice. Beautiful. I love that. Yung pinakapunto na napulot ko doon is ngayon, marami talaga tayong mga suliranin, mga conflicts, mga kahirapan. Pero kung tutuusin dahil sa dami ng mga ano natin, sa dami ng mga technological advances, isipin natin kung anong mga bagay na maaari natin gawin. Isipin natin yung YouTube. Halimbawa, YouTube, di ba? May mga tao na nakaangat mula sa kahirapan dahil sa YouTube. Like, may mga, yung technology gives, isang halimbawa lang yan kung paano yung technology gives us an opportunity. And ganoon din, mas lalo makakaroon ng pakikipag-usap dahil sa technology natin ngayon. So, mas marami tayong pakikitaon para malutas yung mga issue ng nakaraan. So I see, you know, maraming nagsasabi, sana all, sana ganyan yung mga bata ngayon. Purong TikTok, purong ML lang sila. Pero sa totoo lang, kailangan lang nila na tingnan yung mga ganitong videos. Kinakailangan lang na may encourage, mahikayat sila na ganito ang mga pinapasubo sa utak nila, no? Yung mga ganito.
Johnny says he likes the world as it is. A very interesting world, full of problems which we can try to solve. I must say, there are students in Europe the same age as Johnny and me who don't think that way. Because they are not free. Because they aren't allowed to discuss and solve the problems we have. Until these problems are solved, we don't have a life that is worth living. In America too today, I think you have problems you should solve quickly.
Yes.
Many people in America don't see the danger that freedom is in today, as well as somebody coming from the outside. You fear American communists, but you also should really fear people who try to save you from these communists.
Yes. Yes.
I'm told the last year of the Weimar Republic.
Napanood nyo ba yung, or nabasa nyo ba yung Hunger Games, the Hunger Games? Parang gano'n yan. Diba? The capital ay isang masamang pamahalaan. Pero samantalang yung rebel na District 13, yung leader doon, yung pinuno doon, naisip ni Katniss Everdeen kung papalit lang ang isang dictator para sa isa pang dictator. Diba? Magiging mas maganda kaya. So, hindi porket laban sa isang common enemy ay para sa'yo talaga sila, no? We should be thinking and talking about being more neutral and being more thoughtful sa halip ng pagsalakay sa lahat ng mga ibang tao.
Hitler got power because he frightened the people by the danger of communism.
Yes, that's how Hitler got power.
To be saved from communism. And while we were not seeing what we were looking at, he took our freedom away.
Proper guidance, tama ka, Kampi.
I like the United States. A country of freedom and of problems. Because your problems prove that you are free. And that is one of the most important facts I will take back with me to my country. As a summary of my forum experiences, I would like to say to you, the world we want is for me still the world of freedom, of peace, and of tolerance, of international understanding and equality of right. This doesn't depend in the first place on the politicians, but on the people like you and me. We will never get the world we want if there are people in Germany who hate the Jews, or in the American people who hate the Germans.
Yeah.
But we will get it if we first think about our own mistakes, and then about the things other people have done wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I believe in the future? Because it was possible for me, as a German, to be together with the Israeli delegate during Brotherhood Week in the United States, as a German who's together with a very good friend.
Wow.
As long as young people have this opportunity, we must believe in the future. Because the day will come, we young people will take over government. This sounds optimistic, very idealistic, but I'm sorry, I believe in it.
Yes. And I love that. I love that. Maganda yan. Mga kakampi, diba dito, I feel like it's not just, it's more exposure and encouragement to watch this kind of stuff, diba? Sinabi ko sa isa sa mga Facebook posts na medyo nalilito ako kung bakit yung mga pranks, yung mga iba pa, siyempre nakakatuwa naman yan. Pero bakit ang mga yun ang tens of millions of views? Samantalang yung mga science-based, yung mga education-based, yung mga social issue discussions ay kakaunti lang yung mga views. Paghihambing natin sa mga mahalaga din yan. Pero I feel like isang magandang bagay na ginawa siguro nila dahil nanggagaling ang mga kabataan niyon noong 1950s, nanggaling talaga sila sa terrors of war. Kaya alam nila na kinakailangan maging prepared sila. And I just think about that. Para sa ating panahon ngayon, hindi ko alam kung nagiging complacent lang. Pero kung sila mismo ang bibigyan ng responsibility sa education system natin, and I know there's lots of great teachers. Lots of great teachers. Kung mas in-encourage natin yung pagiging matalino, yung pagkakaroon ng magandang pag-uusap, no? Yan ang maganda. Yan sana ang gagawin natin. Tingnan natin yung mga comments dito. And then, mga kakampi, kung may mga comments kayo, isulat nyo and basahin natin ang mga ilan and then tapusin natin yung vlog. Okay, so let's scroll down. Go ahead and give that a like. And I want to see yun, Vangala Ram. Okay, Vangala Ram. Oh yeah, by the way mga kakampi, ito yung apo ni Johnny. Napanood ko yung video and I think namatay na siya. Wait, saglit lang. Namatay ba siya? Kasi parang yung sinabi niya dito is, saglit lang, tingnan ko. Kasi may sinabi siya na namimiss niya. So parang naramdaman ko, parang napaisip ako na baka namatay siya. Oh yeah, I love this comment. It didn't surprise. I'm surprised he didn't become a politician. His vision was ahead of time. Nice. Yeah, I think namatay siya. Let's go ahead and take a look. Here we go. Lobbyist, president of Rotary. I'm not entirely sure about other things he did. Used to sell fish door to door. Yeah, I think, yeah, wala na siya. Wala na daw siya. Aw, that's so sad. Wow, hey! Kakamping Rochelle, maraming salamat sa donation. So, Wait. Kakampi, tandaan mo na nung panahon na yun, Germany was sobrang laking kalaban ng US. So it's, oh yeah, he lived in West Germany, tama, which was less communist, diba? That yan yung democratic side. But regardless, gusto ko yung pananaw niya is about wag basta patain or maghunt ng mga communist. Wag basta maghunt ng whatever, kasi pwede bang magtiwala sa mga ganyan na papatay lang sa tao, di ba? So I think na may punto din siya. May punto din siya na dapat isa-isip din natin na mahalaga din na basta yung neutrality natin, dapat may neutrality tayo and dapat may critical thinking tayo, di ba mga kakampi? Oh, that is really small. I'm sorry. Saglit lang. Okay, yeah, that's way bigger. Okay, para sa iyo, kakampi, shout out to your son, John Leonidas, and Kyle Nye of Connecticut. Wow, astig ang mga pangalan nila, kakampi. Thank you so much for the donation. And by the way, mga kakampi, nakalampas na tayo sa 1 hour and 6 minutes. So I think let's go ahead and titigil na tayo dito. Thank you so much sa panonood. And bukas na naman. Wait, silipin din natin ito. I agree that the environment that they were in greatly affected their way of thinking and made them open to all these social and political issues. Tama. I think we should be mindful of those things now too. Or baka mangyayari din yung, history will repeat itself, and, that's what we don't want to happen. We don't want yung mga sobrang hindi magandang pangyayaring yun. And by the way, mga kakampi, we'll go ahead and I think we'll make the regular time for these live streams. Gawin natin 6 or 6:30. Okay lang ba yan sa inyo, mga kakampi? 6 or 6:30? Paki-comment na lang. Anyhow, maraming salamat. Huwag kalimutan na sampalin ang like at sampalin ang kampana. Kung gusto niyo maging member ng channel, that's a huge support to me, mga kakampi. And pangako ko na, there's a lot more good stuff to come. Thank you so much for giving your voices. Salamat sa napakatalino ninyong comments. Then we'll go ahead at 6 p.m. Eki Kamping Chong and 6 p.m. Awesome. All right, mga kakampi, bukas hanapin ko yung video ni John Antillon na binatikos niya yung US. I want to see that. Okay, mga kakampi. Ingat. Appear tayo. Oh, isa pa.